All right. Well, it is, I'm gonna start with our, few of our housekeeping items, and hopefully we'll get a few more to sign in that time. But good morning. My name is Ashley Kriglow. My pronouns are she, her. I am a middle-aged woman with, shoulder-length brown hair, and I'm wearing glasses. And I am also joined by my colleague Brenda Shafer-Pellinen with the Arrowhead Agency on Aging. And we'd like to welcome and thank you for joining us today for today's session on fostering a caregiver supportive workplace. So before we start, a few housekeeping items. We are excited to announce that today's webinar will be accessible to a wider audience. We have arranged for American Sign Language interpreters who will be present throughout the session. Additionally, we are recording the entire webinar with ASL interpretation. The recordings will be available on our YouTube channel for later viewing. Whether you attend the live session or catch up later, you'll have the opportunity to engage with the material in a way that suits your needs. I encourage you to subscribe to our channel so you can keep up with the latest additions to our video library. We are also looking for suggestions for future webinar topics. If you have any suggestions for topics or speakers, feel free to send those to me at my email, which I will share in the chat. Please keep your microphone set to mute. Just note if you experience any issues with bandwidth or audio quality, it sometimes helps to disable your camera. If you'd like to enter your first name and organization or community that you're from in the chat box, and what you're hoping to get out of today's session and how you found out about it. If you have any questions during today's session, please feel free to enter your question into the chat and we'll address it at the end of the presentation if we have time. Otherwise, I can also email you the answers to those questions at the end later today. And then at the close of today's session, you will see a quick evaluation on today's session pop up in your browser. Please take a moment and complete that survey. It helps us greatly when planning future sessions. And then one last quick reminder is to visit our Facebook page for more information about upcoming sessions, such as we have lifelong learning webinar coming up next month. And then you can also check our website at arrowheadaging.org. All right, so I'm going to take a quick moment to read our land acknowledgement. The Arrowhead Agency on Aging has this land acknowledgement, so I'm just going to go ahead and read that for you quick. So, as we support our mission to help older adults maintain their highest level of independence, we do this while being respectful of the space we are being welcomed into by Indigenous people. We strive to deepen our understanding of the multiple ways in which people see and understand land and acknowledge the Indigenous people who have relationships with this land. We also acknowledge the decades of historical trauma, loss, and grief experienced by Indigenous people. It is our promise to not only recognize these truths, but also to take action to show support of our Indigenous elders, neighbors, and friends, and understand our place within the past, present, and future of this land. We know this is just one step in recognizing and honoring the sovereignty of tribal nations. So I am honored to be joined by today's presenters. I have Shayla Drake and Brenda Shafer-Pellinen, and so I'm going to let them take over.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Next slide. As Ashley said, my name is Brenda Shafer-Pellinen. I am with the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging. With one other hat I wear, I also am the project manager for the Arrowhead Regional Consortium for Healthcare Staffing. And I'll let my colleague Shayla introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I am Shayla Drake. I am a workforce strategy consultant with the Department of Employment and Economic Development, and I cover the 7-county Arrowhead region. So I am one in a team of 6 that support the state of Minnesota. And with that, I will pass it back to Brenda. So next slide, please.
Slide, please. So who are we? At the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging, we are the designated area agency on aging and service planning area for the 7 counties of the Arrowhead region. We are part of a larger system of 7 AAAs across the state that cover the entire state and all of the tribal nations. The Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging is committed to helping older adults maintain their highest level of independence. And area agencies on aging provide services, supports, and information for just about everything that older adults and families could need. Next slide.
And I am with the Minnesota Department of Economic Development, who is basically kind of a support and leader of the Career Force system. And Career Force is basically a one-stop shop for people who need help with employment. And that was kind of set up through federal legislation to create the American Job Network. And so Career Force is Minnesota's brand for like the public workforce system, which is primarily overseen by DEED, which is my employer. And DEED is connected to the Department of Human Services, the Department of Education, and the Department of Labor and Industry. There are 5 partner agencies just in Northeast Minnesota that are helping to support the system with over 55 staff in just the Duluth office alone, and multiple programs operating in the Career Force offices who work together to provide services to the residents in Minnesota. Our customers are dual customers. We're talking about everywhere from the job seekers to the employers to help provide one-on-one supports and services. And individuals that maybe what we call eligible populations receive more intense one-on-one services. So those might be youth, young adults, dislocated workers, seniors, veterans, and more. Next slide, please. So this is our workforce system map. We provide our services regionally so that we have a better understanding of the individuals and the clients that we're serving. So each location is different. So we have a unique understanding of the needs of those individuals. So in order to reach out to us, you can look on careerforcemn.com and look for your local agencies to reach out to us. But the Arrowhead Area Agency on Aging is a partner. The ARDC is a partner. All of our local community-based organizations are partners to help provide services to individuals. Next slide. So our goals for today is to understand the prevalence of caregivers in today's workforce and discuss the impact of caregiving that it has on those working caregivers, becoming aware of the needs of those caregivers, because there's a lot that goes into the work that they're having to provide, and to learn the potential ways that employers can support the caregivers that are in their workplaces. So we're gonna hop on into the next slide, and I'm gonna hand it off to Brenda.
Thank you very much, Shayla. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about, as Shayla mentioned, about who those caregivers are and what is a caregiver. And a caregiver could be someone who's caring for an aging parent. It could be they're caring for children, or more and more we're seeing people taking care of grandchildren. It could be a spouse with a debilitating condition. It could be a family member with an emergent condition, an adult disabled child, a friend or a neighbor who requires support in their own home, or a relative who has no immediate close family. And we could go on and on with all of the examples, but the real point we're trying to make here is that caregivers appear in a variety of ways, each individual with their own situation or scenario. And as you'll see, many of the policies equally benefit those who are providing care for individuals of all ages. Next slide. So what does it look like to be a caregiver for an older adult? I think one of the really challenging things with when we talk about who's a caregiver is that a lot of caregivers really don't self-identify as being a caregiver. They simply see kind of the litany of tasks that they may undertake for their loved one or a friend or a neighbor. And they don't see themselves as being unique or deserving of a title, but they're taking on a great deal of responsibility for the health and safety of another person. And so that could be something as simple as could be transportation to clinic appointments, assistance with meal preparation, maybe stopping and picking up groceries for them once a week, or picking up their medications. It could be maybe going over and mowing the lawn. It could be helping to sit down maybe once a month with somebody and help them pay bills. It could be as personal as providing personal care. So maybe helping someone bathe or just being there while they're showering, maybe taking care of foot care, things like that. It could be doing forms assistance, helping someone apply for different programs, or maybe work with their insurance and things like that. Or it could be setting things up. Maybe it's coordinating Meals on Wheels for them. Maybe it is setting up home care services to come in for that person. So it can look a lot of different ways, but again, it may be that the employee doesn't necessarily see themselves as a caregiver. They just see themselves taking care of those things for mom or for a neighbor or for a friend. Next slide. One group we don't want to overlook, though, is those long distance caregivers. Of the 34 million Americans right now who are providing care for an older family member, roughly 15% of those are long distance. And that's typically more than 100 miles away. And those caregivers live at least an hour's drive from the older adult they're providing care for. In many cases, it might be parents, could also be caregivers caring for adult siblings. And Kathleen McInnes-Dittrich, who is a PhD and associate professor at the Boston College of Social Work, had pointed out some really interesting things on one of her blogs, the Agenda Aging and Work blog. And she points out that what a critical issue it is for employers, these long distance caregivers, that most of these people are working full-time or part-time and might have to rearrange a work schedule to deal or miss work or even quit their jobs to deal with caregiving responsibilities. And keeping in mind, the cost associated for the employer of ultimately of losing that employee and having to replace that person. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, for the long distance caregiver is the fact that when you're dealing with a medical office, or you're dealing with insurance, or you're dealing with professional entities, is needing to make phone calls during the business day. And so, flexibility and start and quit times can help cover some of those needs, but also developing some flexible plans for using sick time and personal leave, allowing that person to maybe take an hour of personal leave time while at the office to go make phone calls. That helps to decrease the stress on that individual, but it also helps to keep the employee at the workplace. And recognizing that, employers are not in a position where they have to subsidize the time needed by those individuals. And also making sure that we're not unduly placing additional responsibilities on other employees as well. So next slide. So what does caregiving for young children look like? It's probably, a little bit more understood by the general public. It might be for myself, it's drop-off times and pick-up times for school. It's working my schedule around when my son has school breaks or has days off. It's when you wake up in the morning and you hear the cough of the kid in your household, and you get that crestfallen feeling of, oh no, I have to figure out how I'm going to cover things so that I can be home for my child. And it can also be things like doctor appointments during work hours, dental appointments, and things like that. Next slide. Back. There we go. So who are caregivers? Caregivers are everywhere in your organization. Caregiving is not a new role for many. Today, we are all caregivers as both men and women of all ages, incomes, cultural backgrounds, and professions are in this role. About 20% of your employees, and that figure doubles if your workforce is mostly female or if a larger number of your employees are in their 40s and 50s. So 1 in 4 people, workers are providing 21 hours or more of unpaid caregiving each week. That's the equivalent of a part-time job. And more than 1 in 6 Americans working full-time or part-time are assisting with an elderly or a disabled family member. So, you know, like I said, this is not something that is brand new, but it is definitely something as our demographics change that we're seeing increase. Next slide, please. So 61% of caregivers were employed at some point in the last year while they were also caregiving. That's 6 in 10 employed caregivers working full-time, so 60%, and another 15% working between 30 and 39 hours. And 1 in 4 of those are working fewer than 30 hours a week. On average, employed caregivers are working 35.7 hours per week. So it's not something that is a small group of people that this is happening with. This is a large portion of your employee population. Next slide. And now also we want to think about the fact that we have non-working caregivers. And Shayla is going to talk a little bit more about this, but who are the people out there right now who could be working for you if they had some accommodations, but are not because they are currently not working because of that caregiving responsibility? So nearly 14% of women aged 25 to 54 are full-time caregivers, along with 1.5% of men in that age group. Caregiving is the single most common reason that people aged 25 to 54 give for not working. And around 18% of full-time caregivers report no children in their homes. So this is a big population of people in a time when we are suffering through a workforce crisis and we are all struggling to find more employees. The idea that there's an entire pool of population out there that we could be tapping into for employees, but who right now are not because of caregiving. And so if we make some accommodations, the possibility of tapping into that group is pretty substantial. And there is, if anyone's interested there is the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis released a study regarding about who is not working related to full-time caregivers leaving the workforce. Next slide.
So what are the impacts of caregiving, right? We've talked about a lot already. And so we've talked about caregivers, but next slide, please. We've heard a lot. There's this term called sandwich generation. And the term sandwich generation refers to individuals that are simultaneously caring for children and supporting aging parents. About a quarter of US adults are a part of the sandwich generation. Next slide, please. This is actually really, really interesting when we're looking at the caregiver relationship. Out of that last sandwich generation discussion, when we talk about this, some individuals are actually taking on those relationships based on a grandparent-in-law, parent-in-law. It might be a spouse or a partner or an other relative. It might not actually be their parent that they're taking care of as well. So when we think about caregiving responsibilities in the sandwich generation, they might be taking care of their parent, their parent-in-law, their child, and maybe an ailing spouse or loved one additionally. So when we think about caregiving responsibilities as a whole, according to half of sandwich caregivers, about 1 in 10 provide care additionally, about 11% to a spouse, and 16% of millennial sandwich caregivers to a neighbor. So individuals that take on these responsibilities additionally take on these other roles and tasks. So it's a compounding issue for caregivers. Next slide, please. So who's doing this? It's everybody, right? It doesn't have a picture or a face. It doesn't have a gender or an age. It doesn't have, anything that we can point to say this is who we need to help, right? When we look at our workplaces or the ages, it's pretty much everyone is caring for everyone that they care for to make it work. And so the National Alliance for Caregiving, in partnership with Caring Across Generations, did a study, and they were able to put a report together that kind of illuminates the challenges facing working parents today who provide what we call intergenerational care. And more than 11 million Americans are caring for an adult family member due to healthcare needs or disability, while also caring for children at home. And so it's a very interesting and eye-opening report. Next slide, please. So this one is, we were talking a little bit about extra hours and individuals having to work. So when we think about caring for multiple we were talking about caring for one. Now, when we add multiple generations, the average adult who cares for both children and aging relatives, in a report, we think about caring about 28 hours a week to care for the kids and another 22 hours tending to older family members. That's 50 hours a week. That's more than a full-time job. You add that on top of your full-time job, that's 90 hours a week on one person. You can start to see how individuals do start to turn down promotions, do start to change from a full-time to a part-time job, do start to need to take more time off or having to take leaves of absences, do start to become disconnected from work. That it's, everything that it does start to correlate. And individuals don't want to have to tell their employers, I can't because of issues at home, because aging is natural. Having children is a natural thing. And to tell your employer, I can't because of natural processes at home, it feels like complaining to some. And so they don't want to complain, right? So how can we support our employees that are doing what they feel they need to do for their families? So a growing share of the sandwich generation are also millennials born between 1981 and 96. So we're talking 28 to 43-year-olds, majority of individuals that are providing these cares. So next slide, please. So what are the impacts of all of this, right? 49% report arriving to work late or leaving early. 15% have had to take a leave of absence. 14% have had to switch from full-time to part-time hours. 10% left the workplace entirely due to their caregiving responsibilities. 4% in early retirement. 6% left work completely, right? So next slide, please. We're going to go into actually a graph on this or a chart on this. So when we kind of look at where kind of this information comes from, it's from that sandwich caregiving report. So if you guys really want to dive into that and look, I really do recommend it. Here it is really broken down. Did some people receive a warning about their work performance or attendance? It very well could have been, the employers didn't know what was going on at home. Their performance is lacking because they are so tired and, worn out. So there's a lot of things here about the impacts on work that caregiving has. So how can we support our employees in the workplaces? So next slide, please. So what are the impacts mentally and physically? When we think about, I know me, if I was having to work 90 hours consistently for long periods of time with just week after week after week, this would probably be me, all the way down the list, but depression, anxiety, becoming easily irritated or upset, feeling isolated or abandoned by others because you need support. I mean, fatigue, sleep problems, risk of illness, injury, or mortality even, and weakened immune system. So this source is from common caregiving problems. So, all of these things are trackable, based on the impacts for individuals. Next slide, please. So when we look at the Big Sandwich caregiving report that was done, they asked individuals what they reported. And 1 in 3 reported high levels of emotional stress. 1 in 5 reported high levels of financial strain, right? As a result of caregiving, 20% reported it made their health actually worse, right? And so this is direct reporting that individuals are saying, this isn't, us saying, oh, I bet, having that much hours would cause that to, somebody to feel that way. No, these are directly reported back from individuals saying, these are the impacts that this has had on our work. Let's see. No. Next slide, please. So more than 3 in 4 caregivers are incurring out-of-pocket costs as it relates to caregiving. Out-of-pocket expenses for caregivers is and that was back in 2016, was over $7,000. And on average, nearly 26% of income is on caregiving costs. And this report was updated in 2021. But the 2016 cost has yet to be updated. And so if we think about current costs and how much families are struggling, the need for additional supports is clear. Next slide, please.
All right. So what are those supports that are needed by the working caregivers? Coming from the same study that Shayla was referencing, folks reported that they needed assistance managing their own emotional and physical stress, needed help trying to brainstorm ways to keep their care recipients safe at home. A lot of times, folks, if there's a safety issue, it contributes to the lack of sleep that someone's getting, because if you don't feel like the person, like you can be off ever, a lot of people that ends up chipping into and causing some pretty substantial sleep deficits. Others said they needed help making end-of-life decisions and making plans and things like that, doing advanced care planning. Needed help managing the care recipients' challenging behaviors. A lot of times when we're talking about dementia and related issues, there are some issues with trying to come up with what's the best approach. How do I address those behaviors? Others reported having difficulty managing the care recipients and incontinence or toileting problems, or finding non-English language educational materials regarding caregiving. So most of the caregivers are indicated that they needed help or information on at least one caregiving related topic, and most reported needs for support or information to help them in managing their own emotional and physical stress and keeping those care recipients safe at home. So we get an idea of what are the things that people are looking for. Next slide. Thank you. So some of the benefits that employers offer, might be a good fit. In some cases, maybe not, or there may be some hesitance in taking advantage of those benefits. And so this is a national survey of caregiver stress in the U.S. workforce. It's done by the Rosalind Carter Institute, and looking at what things were offered and whether they were used, and if they would have used them if they were available. So things like flexible scheduling, unpaid leave, paid family medical leave, mental health and mental and behavioral health coverage, if they had the option of work, of remote work or telework, employee assistance programs, if they had had the option to reduce from full-time to part-time, vacation leave and leave donation sharing programs, how that might have impacted it, job sharing and perhaps having a reduced workload, and being provided with specialized caregiver services. So you can see in terms of what things were offered, and a lot of the things that were offered were taken advantage of. But if they weren't taken, if they had been offered, would likely have been taken advantage of. The next slide. So family caregivers who used more of their benefits reported lower levels of emotional stress in caring for their loved one than those who did not use or were not offered those benefits. And so you can take a look at what those different things were, and whether they used those benefits and how that impacted the individuals. Next slide. So one of the things that we encourage is an employer taking a care census. And this doesn't have to be complicated. This can be something that is relatively simple. We did one here at the Arrowhead Regional Development Commission, and I'll talk a little bit about what some of the outcomes and whether those things were surprising. But what you're really trying to do is find out how many caregivers do you have in your workforce and how those individuals are being impacted, and whether those caregiving issues are a priority for your employees. Are they aware of what benefits currently exist? Are there obstacles or challenges to them taking advantage of those benefits? And are there other things that maybe you haven't thought about that they might think would be good alternative benefits to offer and might be impactful? So just in trying to take a look at taking that time, and I understand that not everyone wants to ask a question if they don't know if they can do something about it, but really getting an idea, getting a lay of the land, and getting an idea of if you're spending money for benefits right now, but they're not being taken advantage of, are there other things? There may be other things that you could be doing that are low to no cost. So really trying to get an idea of what is useful to folks, and if things are not being utilized, why? Is there a stigma attached to taking advantage of these benefits? Really trying to get a feel. And we did it as it was just an anonymous survey, and all of our employees completed it. We can go to the next slide and I'll kind of go through what we found. So what did we learn from our staff here at ARDC? And you'd think, we're the people who are here talking about these things. And we wanted to make sure, if we're going to go out and talk to others about what they could do, we better be walking the talk. And so we went through and did the survey with our employees, and we found out that 60% of our employees have undertaken caregiving tasks while employed by ARDC. 71% said that caregiving had impacted them physically and emotionally. Not surprising. 42% reported that caregiving had impacted them financially. When given a scale of 1 to 5 for rating the importance of caregiving benefits, they rated it a 3.9 out of 5, which is pretty substantial. But kind of embarrassing for us, but really also something that we really should be aware of. 79% of our employees did not know what caregiving benefits were available. So even if you've got things that are available, are you communicating with staff what those benefits are, or how they might be applicable to not just a caregiver who's got somebody who's got children, but also somebody who's caregiving for someone across the lifespan? And all of our respondents, though, we were happy to find out that they all felt that our workplace environment was caregiver friendly, that they felt that they were able to talk to a supervisor and to have accommodations made when they needed it. So next slide. And I will turn things over to Shayla.
So with all of that, what type of like policies might help working caregivers, right? We call those CFWPs, caregiver friendly workplace policies, right? So these are deliberate organizational changes in policies and practice to target culture and reduce work and family conflict, and then support the employees' lives outside of work. So next slide, please. Let's just bring everybody down for a second, right? Let's just make everybody super sad for like 2 seconds. This is the job market in Northeast Minnesota. There is 0.6 people for every job vacancy, and that does not even account for skills matching. We have a tight labor market. So every single one of our employees that you have managed to acquire that has a skills match for your organization is so highly valuable, like highly valuable. And it's getting better. But as you can see, since 2021, we've been there for a while, and it doesn't look like it's going to be getting any better anytime soon. As we know, Northeast Minnesota is an continuously aging region, and our population is continuing to retire. And so as they do that, how do we support them in that transition as well, while we continue to maintain work? So looking at this, we need to understand, how do we support our workplaces to continue to thrive? So we don't have a ton of workers to choose from and to be able to just shuffle through. So next slide. So research shows a positive return on investment for our policies that enable caregivers to balance their lives with their responsibilities. Whether that is, workplace flexibility, which is one of the things that we're going to focus on right now. But employee engagement and productivity improves, talent recruitment and retention improves. You have reduced healthcare costs due to their, ability to decrease their stress and their, there's a lot that goes into that. Workforce loyalty, and then for every dollar invested in workforce arrangements, the business can expect their return ranging from $1.70 to $1.34. So that's from the AARP and REACT returning investment for their supporting policies. That was that 2016 report. Next slide, please. But the flexible workplace policies, when we say that, people think that just means telework or hybrid. That is not what we're talking about all of the time. There's a ton of options when you're talking about flexible workplace policies. You could talk about a compressed work schedules. You can talk about banking hours. You could talk about flexible schedules and breaks. You can talk about flexible start and end times. You can talk about job shares. You can talk about alternative work site locations. So even if they need to be, on site for the job, can you have alternative site locations for those options? There's many options that you can choose when you talk about workplace flexibility, but it's making that flexibility work for your organization and your employees. So it's being thoughtful and intentional to make it work for your organization, right? So a lot of the times when we talk about things like flexibility, it becomes a very narrow discussion about just remote work, telework, or half days. It does not have to be that. Sometimes it just becomes a discussion with your employees. What could work for our organization? What could work for you? Open up the discussion and be really intentional, and maybe just have some roundtable discussions about with your employees about what could work, because sometimes they might even know best And you might come up with something new that's not on this list and create your own flexible work schedules. Next slide. So providing all employees with easy access to information, as Brenda said, you can have policies that can support them and help them along their journey, no matter what it is, from childcare to, throughout the, span of aging through to even, rental assistance. I mean, employers have all kinds of different programs to support employees that employees don't even know it exist. Right. So they're out there struggling in the world and the employers are paying for these supports. So how do you as an employer communicate that information to your employees? So display information and resources in common areas included in newsletters, emails, websites. How are your employees consuming information from you? Creating an internal web page with announcements, fact sheets, brochures, reminding your employees of workplace policies and your benefits and your services, providing tools, toolkits, and caregiver platforms, and then we'll get here in a little bit about different ways and levels in which you can supply information and partner with different organizations that can really help clarify ways that you can get information to your employees at even different levels. So we'll get into that here in a little bit. Next slide. But one thing that's really interesting to note with getting that information in front of your employees, if you have anything in your organization that, let's say, supports them with, helping provide care, helping find care, helping support care, that's fantastic. But if they don't know about it, they don't know about it. Because fun fact is, since in 2015, about 23% of people had difficulty navigating external systems to provide care. And in 2020, 30% found it about extremely difficult to provide care externally. But they don't even know what's available internally. So how can they find out anything externally? So I think the better that we are with helping our employees say, here are some resources that can help you navigate external systems, the better we can be. Because sometimes it literally might just be a phone number. Be like, hey, here's a phone number that's available for anyone that's having, issues providing care for a loved one, and having it by a time clock. Sometimes that can mean the world to an employee that didn't know it was available. So I think a lot of the times us being aware of the difficulties that our employees are having out in the world can mean a lot to them. Because as Brenda said, they didn't even know what resources were available for them internally. And I know for me, myself, working for the state of Minnesota, I have trouble navigating internal supports and resources, right? So let alone navigating external supports and resources for other individuals. Next slide. So coordinating workplace events and services, which many are low cost. So setting up an on-site lending library for employees, hosting workplace seminars for caregiving or caregiving fairs, providing an on-site support group, consultation and referrals during the workday. So that might be calling in, which we'll get to here in a little bit. When we talk about levels of support, we have different partners that can come in and provide, free sessions for the employees to talk about opportunities and provide consultations and education sessions. Incorporating working caregiver support into existing wellness programs, allowing employees to bring in their children into work whenever their care falls through, if it's safe at your work site to do so. Having, little areas where there's, you know, toys and books and crayons available for if and when those needs occur. Offer childcare assistance through subsidies or flex spending accounts. Invest in expansion of childcare slots in your community by partnering with local childcare centers. There's a lot of opportunities for that to allow those childcare centers to expand or stay open with those slots. Where possible, align employee work hours with the school day schedule, and then subsidize backup care options. And when we're talking about the flex spending accounts, having the same options with flex spending accounts for elder day care options as well. So offer stress reduction programs and or discounts also. Next slide, please. Training management and supervisors on work-life issues is really important because informing upper management to understand caregiving issues can be huge, because somebody can be really tired, really drained, really stressed, and the employer is just thinking they're disconnected from work, not happy with their job, just don't want to be here. And the employee starts getting the performance reviews. As we saw in the last slide, about 10% of individuals had reported receiving a bad performance review based on the impacts of their caregiving. So these can have a direct impact on the business. So training upper management on policies, benefits, and supports and services that that provide for employees with caregiver responsibilities. Establishing best practices for managers overseeing staff with caregiving responsibilities, and keeping work functions and training during work hours. There's a lot of times where we'll have, after hour social events and weekend retreats and things like that. And it's not optional, it's mandatory. And so now you're having to find child care and weekend care and this and that. And, you know, what if at the same time you're also having to take care of someone's med schedule and set up pill boxes, and now you have to find someone else to do that too. So not only are you trying to find child's care, you're trying to find someone to set up, med care, and it becomes a lot more that people don't realize. Next slide, please. So as I was talking about a minute ago, seeking opportunities and resources beyond the workplace, right? So partnering with other businesses and organizations in your area to share ideas and resources. So we've got area agencies on aging, locals of chambers and workforce centers that have resources for older adult resources to support for employers. Request caregiver and aging professionals to speak to your employees, right? So examples include family caregiver consultants, geriatric nurse practitioners, medical social workers, like the Alzheimer's associations, the Parkinson's associations, geriatric education centers. A lot of them will be willing to come out, talk at your organization. And then suggested there's like a variety of support services. So like when I was talking about putting the phone number back by the time clock, things like that, you've got Senior Linkage Line, Minnesota Help Info, Age Well Arrowhead, and I'm sure Brenda would love to add right here, because this is where we're talking about you have the biggest impact for change in your organization to support your employees. It's going to be this slide. In the next slide, we're going to talk about the different tiers and the levels to be able to impact your workplace. Brenda. Next slide. So creating a plan for your company. When we think about this, we've got kind of like two tiers when I think about it. It's kind of like how involved, how deep you want to go, right? So I would say the first level would be kind of like assess your current employee or caregiver needs, reviewing your existing workplace flexibilities and policies. If a workplace flexibility policy does not exist, consider creating one, and then creating additional fact sheets, brochures, and materials. So that's kind of like base level. You're digging a little deeper, maybe creating an online resource for working caregivers, sending out occasional emails to employees about caregiver issues and resources, maybe setting up an online lending library with resources that your employees can access, and then training upper management on caregiver policies and benefit and support that include all of the benefit and support services that are available, right? So that they're educated and informed. And then the deepest level would be hosting workplace seminars and caregiving fairs, inviting caregiver and aging professionals to your workplace to speak to your employees, providing on-site support groups and caregiver consultations, and providing on-site day or elder care at the workplace. And so when we think about it as like a level or tier, that would be those recommendations. Brenda, do you have anything to add here?
I just think it's what's really important is it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. It is, and it can be something where you're going to maybe dip your toe in the water and start out in that kind of that upper level of just looking at the needs, looking at reviewing your policies, looking at how does your language in your policies address caregiving? Does it say caregivers in general, or does it say children? Does it say making sure that your policies cover as many people in as many situations as possible? And the fact sheets and brochures and things like that, let us at the Area Agencies on Aging be a partner with you in helping connect you with all of those resources and really providing you with some good vetted materials from our regional partners. Yeah, so any of that, any step along the way, we want to be there and be a partner with you and help you. If you're looking at doing a lending library and you're looking at, well, what are good resources out there? I don't know what's a good book on caregiving. Reach out to us. And we are happy to share the information that we have with you and connect you to resources.
Absolutely. So next slide, please. Really, this one here this is just an easy checklist. Is your workplace culture caregiving friendly? Do you use the term family caregiver and, instead of, childcare, instead of, these kind of things when you think about that? Do you consider family caregiving the same way you think about maternal and paternal employee responsibilities? Do you take into account emotional and financial and spiritual needs of your employees? Are managers sensitive to the presence of caregivers in business units? And are you as an organization willing to commit to supporting caregivers as best you can? The thing is that it's having the understanding that caregivers are not just caring for children. I think that's the biggest thing when we have this understanding is the impact in our workplaces. We hear a lot about childcare, and there's a huge gap in the conversation. Next slide.
And we as employers have the ability to really set that tone and as to what is in your environment, making sure that you are being as inclusive as possible, and that everyone who is in that caregiving role is treated with the same type of consideration.
Absolutely. And so, like, what can each one of us do? Really, it's just being aware that and that it exists and being sensitive to it, right? When I was talking about childcare, it's like, what about us? That's something that is real. It's a real thing. Toning down the forced fun when I was talking about the after hours things, though, that's a big one. Applying benefits equally when we're thinking about providing care benefits, especially care benefits. Those are huge. Holistic approach to well-being, and ability to connect with aging services. If you can do that for your employees, even if it's the free ones, some employers take that extra step and hire, provide consultant hours and stuff like that. If you do, that's great. But even just providing those those free resources and having them there for your employees. And then creating a quiet space for employees in your organization to make phone calls, and letting them know this space is available for you, you know, to do what you need. It just kind of means a lot to individuals. But the preach and teach compassion, and living your values, I think we all kind of know that, but it gets away from us all sometimes. When we think about family and we think about, you know, a lot of us have and I'm not going to say all, but a lot of us have parents, and a lot of us have family members, and, you know, having to take care of them does become a struggle. So, but we forget that when we get to work. So when we get to work, we have to remember it sometimes. And then making sure managers are prepared to assist. But with that, Brenda, anything here to add?
No, I want to make sure we're being respectful of everyone's time, and we're just about coming up on the hour. And so we'll take some time. If anybody has any questions or anything that they'd like to share or contribute, you know, we'll stay on here for a little bit. And we will, as Ashley mentioned, we will have a recorded copy of this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. And so if, as you're watching things, you're like, gosh, I really think I can think of somebody who should have seen this or should have heard this. And we want you to feel comfortable sharing those resources with others as well.
Well, thank you all for attending. And I do just want to quick say that we have a upcoming webinar on August 14th about lifelong learning. So watch for information on that. And here is our contact information if anybody needs that again, and feel free to reach out to Brenda and I by email if you have any questions or any ideas for other webinars. So thank you all for attending today.